Welcome to the Neil Wattier podcast, where you'll hear real stories of resilience and discussions on how to enhance your mental strength. I am your resilience and mental performance coach, developing your skills to grow and thrive through stress and adversity and propelling your mental performance from good to great. Listen on your favorite podcast hosting service, and please leave a rating and a review. Also, follow my content on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn, or visit neilwattier.com. Joining me on the show today, I have Dr. Kendra Lowe, who's an Air Force veteran, attended the Air Force Academy and served 5 years on active duty and continues to serve as a military spouse. She has her doctorate in education. She's a board-certified specialist in school psychology and a clinical mental health counselor. And adding to that amazing list of accolades, she just released her book, which I have on Amazon as Wake Up, Kick Ass, and Repeat. I actually had the opportunity to read this book this last weekend and was completely blown away by it. Kendra, thanks a lot for joining me on the show.
Oh, Neil, thanks so much for having me. And honestly, I'm so blessed that our paths have crossed and having us both focusing in the same areas, helping military families, and how can we do a better job of giving them what they need and providing them the support that's so important as in our lives. So kind of to give you a little bit of background of how I got to this spot. As you mentioned, I was active duty for 5 years and did the dual military gig with my husband, but just really shocked and surprised when I got out, the sheer amount of stress that I experienced as a military spouse, seeing the other side of it. And it intrigued me because I just hadn't felt that before. And had a chance to research military spouse stress for 10 years and found surprising, concerning trends on clinically significant stress levels. So essentially what I found is that military spouse stress, according to my research, is double that of civilian spouses. And this is something that is gravely concerning, considering the sheer amount of stress that we experience. I had another great opportunity to go out and kind of start speaking to spouses about this and meeting amazing military spouses and having them come up to me afterwards and express their gratitude for validating the stress and the significant stress that they felt, because I think a lot of the times spouses are afraid to raise their hands and just say, I'm experiencing this too. We're super strong. And so sometimes that can be our curse, that we're proud and we don't want to stand up and say we're struggling and suffering. But by opening that door and talking about it, I had so many come up to me afterwards and they're just like, it's almost like a weight has been lifted off our chest that we can talk about it now. And so I began doing several presentations on it while my husband and I were over in Japan at squadron levels. And then my husband and I did several commanders courses talking about how to help with military spouse stress. But then the next step was kind of, okay, so you've presented this problem, spousal stress, and it's significant. Kind of why is that important? And I think we all understand in general as human beings, it's important that stress affects us. But the other part is, speaking to the military at large, that it does affect retention. It does affect mission readiness when we're talking about spouses that are having a hard time getting out of bed in the morning. So it was presenting this as a real significant issue. And then the now what? So I wanted to take that next step and help spouses even further. So I validated that concern, but then I wanted to take that next step of how can we help you even more? So that really jump-started the idea of the spouses that I was most concerned about were the individuals that were struggling to get out of bed in the morning that I've met, and those at clinical levels of stress. And how do I meet them where they're at? And that's a question I kept asking myself. My bandwidth and my husband's bandwidth is only so large, and I wish I could go to every single home and every single squadron and brief on this and give tools personally. But the reality of it is that only added more stress for me as a spouse, trying to reach as many as I could. So my husband and I kind of brainstormed, and he's my right hand man, and just said, how do we multiply you, and how do we reach spouses where they're at? And so really the idea to build a resource and a tool that you can have in your home, which is a book, was how this was born. And so then I essentially took all my research, as well as a lot of statistics and information out there, which the Air Force and the military at large has a tremendous amount of resources and statistics on this. And then I coupled that with anecdotal stories of myself, and then went out again and interviewed about 35 spouses that have contributed their personal, powerful stories in this book. And then I wanted the other part of it, which is the key part, in my opinion, is giving you those resources and tools. And so the book is an 8-week study that can be done individually or ideally as a group, and it's based on rational behavioral therapy. So it's saying this is an issue. Now what do we do with it? Well, this is a self-help tool that you can do individually or with a group of peers to help yourself to better social and emotional health when you are unable or sometimes unwilling to seek that professional help.
Well, and that's something that when I read through the book this weekend, you sent me a digital copy, which was amazing. Thank you for that. I had a chance to read through it, and that was something that really caught my attention. It's not just a book with information. It's a solution. You're working towards that now what? Because we can talk a lot about self-awareness and emotional intelligence, and we can have all this discussion about the problems that we're having. And one of the, I don't know what are the barriers, what are the issues that we're having. Either people don't realize that they're there, or they're hesitant to seek the help. But we have to work on the now what. And I think that from talking over the last couple of weeks, you and I lining up this discussion, and then also discussing where does our partnership go from here, because there's a lot that we can do together. We're both very interested in that now what part. And that's something that I really liked looking through your book, that you provide discussion points, you provide reflection opportunities, areas to actively write responses, so that whether you're doing it by yourself or with a group, is the idea that you're addressing the now what.
That's exactly right. And really going forward with this, there's a lot of great resources and tools out there, but I wanted this to have that extra component of here's how I can take that step myself. And I think, as you mentioned, reflecting and reading and doing a lot of mindfulness and important things that are very buzzword right now are important. But this rational behavioral therapy, the foundation of the book, is forcing you to kind of reset your thoughts. And I think it's really important because the premise of it is that we have very little control over the events in our lives, but we have ultimate control over our thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. And I think that's so important as military families and spouses, that we give up a lot of control. And so part of this resource and tool is giving control back to the spouses and saying, you absolutely can make a difference. You can help yourselves. You can help others. That's possible. And I think it's very invigorating to have that power and that control back of an aspect of your life in a culture that we lack that often.
The other thing that I like about this book is you don't just put, here's the ideas, here's the research that I've done, here's some things that you can do. You put your own life story into this book. You used yourself as the example. And I thought that was phenomenal, because people love stories, and they love relevant stories. And so you took all the way back to early in your life and your transition through the academy, your service, out of the service, and then to becoming a military spouse. You jumped straight into, right at the beginning of the book, talking about your transition to it was Kadena, Japan, and this really difficult transition and the amount of effort that it took to not only stay active, but to thrive through that difficulty. And that's where I do a lot of the work in resilience and mental performance, is growing and thriving through that stress and adversity. And I think that's where you had a really good emphasis with your story, providing the example and what you did through it.
And Neil, I think that's so important because, again, I've asked 30 spouses to share their stories in this resource. And if I'm asking them to be brave and share some very personal, raw stories of themselves, I felt it only fair that I dig deep and share some of those of myself as well. So yes, it talks about how at times I was not thriving and how I didn't know how to get there, how prior to years of research, I didn't know how to do it. I was lucky to train under my mentor, Dr. Hinkle, in rational behavioral therapy. But prior to that, when I talk about some of the stories, particularly when my husband was stationed in North Carolina, I didn't have those tools yet. And so I do want to stand before spouses and say, I've struggled as well, and I haven't had those tools readily available. And reflecting back, looking back in that moment, that really would have helped me not stay in that dark place as long as I did. Have I been in dark places before? Absolutely. I think we all have. And I think the more that we're honest about that and real about that, the more it normalizes it for other spouses.
And that's a really important point, normalizing and letting people know that most people are not experiencing something out of the ordinary or new that hasn't been experienced by somebody else. And it's difficult because it's isolating, it's difficult for us individually. And it's not until you break out and you start having conversations and you realize other people are going through something similar, or they can at least empathize and help me through it. When you start communicating and building community and building relationships, I think that's where people really do their best work, because isolation is very difficult when you feel like you're doing something that's never been experienced before and you're the only one going through it and you've got nobody that's ever going to understand what you're going through. That's defeating, and it's really, really difficult to find your way through that. And something else that you said was, even the most resilient people have their really, really bad times, because resilience is not always pretty. You have to go through some of those things to really see just how resilient you really are. You don't know what it's like until you test, until you've been tested. And I like to throw out there that you can either go out and you can find adversity, or adversity is going to come and find you. It's only a matter of time, and military spouses are really, are notorious for getting in the mix, because it's like your husband was a commander, as an officer that was leading, units. I was a senior enlisted leader where I was relied upon by people like your husband to help lead those people.
Absolutely.
So I that's where I can empathize. I don't necessarily know what he went through, but I can kind of understand it because I've seen it. Similar, you have that community as military spouses where you each have been through something where you can lean on each other. And I think that's where building that community and building those line of communications is where we're going to reach the people that either don't feel like they're being heard or don't feel like they can be. You had a couple examples in the book where some people gave their testimony of they didn't leave the house, they weren't taking care of themselves, and it was even further isolating them because of this. It just kept like that downward spiral.
It is, and I think it's so important because when you're in it, you don't see it, and it's really hard to see and identify. And that testimony that you were talking about, the individual that comes to my mind right away, she did not realize how much she was suffering, and until we were able to really help her and seek professional help for her, and that's why I do believe, as you were saying, the group the way this was formatted, it can be done individually, but really the intention is for peers to sit through this and do this together for 8 weeks. And why is that? Exactly what you said, is to build that peer support, which is so important to growth. Some of my favorite counseling I've ever done, and I've worked in acute centers with children. I've worked in emergency rooms with severe individuals and adults, and I did SEER training for a while when I was the psych oversight for SEER, and still to this day, some of the most powerful work I did was in group therapy. And why is that? It's not so much the work that I did as a facilitator, as a therapist. It's sitting in the room full of individuals that have been through liked struggles and seeing someone sit across from another individual and say, I have been where you were, where you are 6 months ago. And I am telling you, you can get through it. I am telling you, I am living proof that you can thrive, that it's possible, that it is a struggle. I've experienced it. I've been there, but there's hope, right? And so in those moments and working in groups, yes, I'm part of that as a therapist or counselor facilitating it, but really it's the dynamic and the power, the powerfulness of those individuals helping themselves through it. And that was another part in the back of my mind when I was building this. I really want spouses to sit down with each other, ideally 6 to 10 individuals to work through this, because my hope is after the 8 weeks are done that they've gone through these reflection questions and these exercises that are, as you said, spelled out for them and given for them every single week, that they've shared a part of themselves. So then 8 weeks down the line, when they hit another stressful time, which we know that's probably highly likely as military families, that they'll reach out to someone in that group because they form that connection with them and seek out that social community and support.
Nice. We've talked quite a few times about transition, and you experienced after serving on active duty, you transitioned, and yours was a little bit more unique in the fact that you transitioned from active duty to a civilian and a military spouse. And you even addressed that in the book, as well as some of those initial conversations were very, very difficult. Talk about the part in the book where you discuss being really uncomfortable to the point that you didn't even discuss your strengths and your education and all the great things that you had to bring to the conversation, but for whatever reason, you felt a barrier to that.
Absolutely. And that's, certainly something I wanted to share within the book is that in this resource it is very difficult when you're putting yourself out there and meeting a new group of individuals, and we're required to do that so many times, right? Like, how many times do we move and have to start over again and kind of decide what part of myself do I want to share with these strangers? And I really struggled at that moment because in this group of spouses, and it's nothing other than at that point my insecurities, right? So I didn't, again, I was struggling with getting out. I loved serving. I loved wearing the uniform. And I missed that. And so I had not quite dealt with that myself. And so sitting in that group, I didn't really feel comfortable sharing. I'm a veteran, and I felt like I'd seen that before, and there was a little bit of a stigma with that. And then I didn't want to share exactly what my husband was, because I wanted my own sense of identity and uniqueness separate from my husband, because I am my own individual. And so really in that moment of this social, it was, kind of, hi, it's nice to meet you, Kendra. What do you do? And I vividly remember sitting there at a loss for words. I couldn't find a job in this new in Albuquerque where we were at. I struggled to find a job, and so I really was staying at home. And I hate that word "just," right? So that was really what popped in my head of I'm just staying at home. And I didn't want to say that either, because there is such value and merit in what spouses do to keep up the home front and the work associated with that. And so I think I paused for like a good 2 minutes that were uncomfortable, and she kind of looked at me and was just waiting for that response of, tell me about you. And I finally was like, well, I'm at home right now, and I'm looking for a job, and kind of left it at that. And looking back, I wanted to say so much more, and I could have made other connections, I think, at that point. But really boiling it down to was the fact that I was uncomfortable where I was at that point in my life, and couldn't rationalize through the situation to be able to feel comfortable in that room full of spouses.
And you mentioned stigma, and there's a lot of that word is used a lot. You talked about stigma. You said buzzwords. There's a lot of things that get thrown around in the military community, and those things tend to bleed out into the larger community outside the military. When you talk about the stigma of mental health or seeking help, the stigma of being a military spouse, and how do you deal with the issues of moving around, and the active spouse is usually the one who dictates and you're kind of along for the ride. Like, there's a lot of things that go along with the stigma of being a military spouse. And being a senior enlisted leader, I've been involved with commanders and other senior leaders where we get involved with like key spouse programs and try to get spouses involved, not only in the unit, but also help them find resources of whatever it is that they need. The problem that we run into is there's never one generic conversation that you can have. Every single person is an individual looking for something different, or maybe not knowing what they're looking for, and those are sometimes the more difficult ones where they don't really know how they fit in. Again, referring to your book, there was a story of a young spouse, recently married. She came to the gate and fumbled around, couldn't even find her ID. And then she was late to her lunch date with her husband because she couldn't find the unit, because she didn't know the verbiage. She didn't know the acronyms. She was so new. And sometimes we, as active members, forget that there's people out there that don't know what they're doing, and it's got to be frustrating from that end. So trying to have individual conversations that matter to each individual person. You can't go into a conversation the same way every single time, and that's difficult on both ends, but it's definitely something we have to figure out and we have to get better at.
I agree, and I think that's part of it, is that we do have amazing resources available to us, but as you know, a lot of the resources continue to go underutilized, and so it's that question of why are they? There was a We Can program while we were over at Kadena that it was essentially kind of like a group that met at the Airmen and Family Readiness Center, and unfortunately they ended up having to cancel it because 1 or 2 spouses would show up, and that was shocking to me because Kadena is such a large most people live on base, right? So it's those resources are right there in your backyard, and it still goes underutilized. And so you kind of have to go back to what do our spouses need, and that is really hard to figure out. And again, my hope is with this new resource is that it's providing more of that comfortable, I don't have to get out of my home to go use this resource right now. This can give me kind of that first step. And so in the reflection and kind of going through it, I've had a couple spouses that were part of the beta group that said, I didn't realize how distorted my thoughts were until I went through this resource and realized all this negative self-talk is what was bringing me down. So because of it, I had a couple spouses that signed up for individual therapy, which I think is amazing because they were able to kind of discover that they were struggling more than they thought they were. But I think, as you mentioned, sometimes sometimes the individual doesn't even know what they know, what they need. And so that's very difficult for, especially with military spouses, to kind of figure it out. Or on the other side of it, you finally find what you need at a base or a location, and then guess what? As one of the stories was, this individual found a fantastic MFLAC that they made a great connection with, and then, the MFLAC had to move, or that individual had the PCS, and so that is part of the other struggle, is we finally kind of figure out or make that connection of a resource that works for us, and then as spouses, unfortunately, we have to uproot and start over again and find it again.
So let's get into some examples of, let's actually talk about some of the skills and tools, because we talk a lot about one of the common sayings that you hear in the military is, you don't rise to the occasion, you fall to the level of your training. And that resonates with me because military members come from such varied backgrounds. When you think about our influencers, our beliefs, our habits, mindset matters, yes, but you can have the proper mindset, but if you don't have the skills in place, you may be falling back on old counterproductive habits. So that's why I like resilience and mental performance as a skill-based discussion, as skill-based development, because we can have philosophical conversations all day long of mindset matters and perspective, and it's all about your lens. That's great. But then we get into the now what. So we talk about skills. I think skills matter maybe even more than mindset, because even when you're having that bad day, if you've practiced the skill, you can grow and you can thrive through that. And sometimes, let's just be honest, I don't like the word cope, but sometimes I just need to get through Friday, and I can relax on the weekend, and I can rest and rejuvenate. Sometimes that's the answer, and that's okay.
But
so let's
that is, you rationalize through it, right? You said sometimes I just need to get through Friday, and so you're rationalizing through. You're making it not overwhelming. That it's not that it was a hard week, and you're looking at it in bigger terms. You yourself just said, I just have to get through Friday, because I know on the other end I have the weekend. I have a chance to restore. I have a chance to reset. And so you yourself, by doing that, are rationalizing, I just need to get through these next 8 hours, because I know then I have a chance to do these things, right? And I think that is really important, instead of, oh my gosh, it's Friday, this is, I don't know how I'm ever going to get through this. I don't know if I have a briefing coming up, or it's so much work that's on top of me, and then Monday's going to end. You just downward spiral in your thoughts, instead of, it's just Friday. I got to get through Friday, because I know I have these great things planned, or I know I can reset over the weekend.
Right. And I know that, the one saying keeps popping in my head, that hope doesn't float. But if we don't have hope for something, if we don't have a vision or something that we're living for, even if it is just, some relaxation on the weekend, there's got to be something that we live for to get through those difficult days, because even the most resilient people have their bad days. So let's talk more specific on skills. And a couple of them that pop out that you had discussed in your book. We talk a lot about gratitude, because optimism and realistic optimism and positive thinking matters. But then you also utilize, in the Air Force Resilience Program, they use it as the ABC model. And that's one that I teach a lot. And I've also gone through the Army Resilience Training Program, and they teach it a little bit different. But really, both the programs come from the University of Pennsylvania, positive psychology. And so they're essentially the same thing. So talk to a little bit about the ABC model that you use in your book, and why is that so effective as a basic foundational resilience skill?
And I preface a lot of the chapter that I go into the ABC model and kind of building that foundation is, a lot of these, when we talk about them, they seem like very intuitive things, right? The concepts seem very intuitive, but what we forget is sometimes, even though it seems simplistic, we're not doing them on a regular basis. We're falling, as you said, into old habits and old thoughts and old beliefs and attitudes, and we don't even realize we're doing it. So really taking a step back and going through that that ABC process forces you to really identify something that you might not know is there. So the ABCs: A, your perceptions; B, your thoughts; and C, your feelings. So what in that A, what are your perceptions about that event? And it's really forcing yourself to write down exactly as you see it, that event, as factual as possible, because there's a big difference between subjective and objective, right? And our subjective can easily bleed into that. So that A portion is really being as factual as possible. That B portion, your thoughts. What thoughts did you have in that moment? What thoughts? 3 of your concrete thoughts that you have during that situation, that you're picking that one situation. And then see, what were your feelings? So your thoughts generate your feelings. And what this is telling you is, as you feed through it and as you work through those ABCs, it's not necessarily that event, that A, that's driving those emotions. It's your thoughts. It's the B. And that's where you can take control as an individual, because there are so many things in our lives, that event, that we have zero control over. Now, do we have control over some events in our lives? Absolutely, we do. But for the, especially as military families, a lot of those events, we don't. So the next step really is your thoughts. It's trying to shift your thought process. And so the next step is, part of those tools, what kind of thoughts do we typically have? We have positive thoughts, we have negative thoughts. And the other one I really like to bring up is neutral thoughts, right? So positive thoughts, yes, we kind of know what those are. And negative, those are pretty obvious, but there can also be very neutral thoughts that aren't negative. It's saying, hey, I know this PCS is going to be hard. I don't really want to do it, but I'm going to find a way to get through this. It can be neutral. Neutral can still have positive feelings come out of it. But it's what I'm trying to really coach individuals through is identifying when those habitual negative emotions pop into your head. It's that constant tape that's playing that you might not even realize is playing, thoughts that consistently play. So really, that's the basic premise of it, is identifying where you can intercede most effectively as an individual is really with your thoughts, because those thoughts are what drive your emotions and behaviors.
And that's a very, very close to the way that I teach the same model. A couple things that I like to add to that is, you talk about the C being feelings. I think of those, that area more as the consequences of your thoughts, meaning your emotions and your physical reactions. Because if you without realizing that there's a trigger or there's an event that upset you, and suddenly your heart's racing and you're emotionally out of control, you're right. Working that backwards of not looking at the event, but what is happening in my head that's causing that, because it's your thoughts that drive your emotions and your physical reactions. Your heart doesn't race. I mean, unless you're on a treadmill, your heart doesn't race because somebody cut you off in traffic or you got into an argument. It's your thoughts about that event that drive your heart racing. And I use a lot of comparisons to like sports psychology, because when you think about it, and it doesn't even have to be sports, if you've ever done anything competitive, or even the example of going and taking a test, if you walk into the room and suddenly your heart's racing and you can't think of any of the answers, chances are it's because you're psyching yourself out. It's in your thoughts that's driving that. And you talk about positive, negative, neutral. I tend to focus a lot on productive and counterproductive, which is we're essentially saying the same thing. So I tell people, don't think about your feelings in the C, your emotions. Don't think about positive or negative, because you think of anger and most people are going to say, oh, that's a negative emotion. Well, can you think of a time where anger has a productive outcome? And they say, well, yeah, sure, I can think of that. Okay, so don't think of those things as positive or negative. Think of those things as productive and counterproductive, because if the result is anger and that results in a productive outcome, then that's okay. There's nothing wrong with feeling anger. I mean, people, you talk about, I don't know how many stages of grief, the whole idea of going through grief. All of those are productive if you productively go through the emotion. The problem comes about where you try to skip something, or you ignore something, or you try to pretend like, no, I'm not angry, or, no, that's not a big deal. And you suppress those emotions. If you don't productively experience the emotion, that's when people have trouble with the stages of grief. And so similar with that ABC model, if you look at what's the productive outcome that I want to have thoughts that drive a productive outcome. And I think that's very similar to what you just said. So I love that model. And that's why I was so happy when I saw it in the book.
It's there because it's highly effective. And again, when working as a therapist, they're very tangible, basic tools that we can start as a foundation, and see quick results with it. And that's why rational behavioral therapy is so effective, is because it's forcing the individual to kind of take stock in those thoughts, right? And I think we talk about doing that all the time, but we don't actually do it. And it's a really important part of working through and backstepping. Where do I want to be, and how am I going to get there? And the thoughts are the key component. And so that's really, as you talk about the tools, that's the foundation. And as each chapter, as you know, but as each chapter goes on, I build on that. So it's building on that concept, practicing those tools, and then giving you, another exercise or concept that incorporates the ABCs. And so the next one was really attitudes and beliefs. And so it's identifying different attitudes and beliefs that we have. And again, that ABC pattern is very programmable. We don't even realize that certain events that happen in our lives automatically drive those emotions so much that when you form an attitude, you can have a picture representation of that event, and it can elicit immediate emotions and skip the thought pattern, because it's so deeply rooted in that ABC pairing that I can hear the word deployment and my husband's not even deploying, and I can see the news over the weekend of what happened, and I'm automatically my heart rate races, right? Because he has gone before. And so I can see current news from this weekend, and I'm already feeling that, because it's an attitude and it's a belief about deployments that has been so programmed in my life that I have to consciously sit through this weekend and say, Kendra, he's not going to deploy. You don't have to worry about that. He's not in a position that he can deploy right now, and rationalize through it, because it is something that has been so programmed as my experience. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And we all have deep-seated thoughts. We've all have experiences. We all have influencers. And when I get into like the foundations or an essentials type workshop, and I talk to people about, this is an awareness tool that easily can be used as a regulation tool. When we talk about self-regulation and self-awareness, you cannot self-regulate until you are self-aware. You have to be, and self-awareness means a lot of things. And working this model backwards, and that's the other way. The other reason why I love it is because it's so easy to take something that takes 2 or 3 seconds. I mean, if you're talking about 10 seconds, you've probably cycled through this model 4 or 5 times, maybe more. So you take something that is happening in a matter of seconds, like you talked about, you hear a certain word or you see news on TV, and instantly you've got thoughts that are going through your head. If you are not able to stop that or slow down that process and work it back so you can see your physical reactions and your emotions, how they're driven by your thoughts, and then work even further backwards, where you talk about, well, what is it that, what's in my recent history of, the experiences that I've had that create the beliefs and my impression of the world, and what's driving my thoughts. If you're not willing to go that deep into your self-awareness, you're really going to have difficulty with self-regulation long term, and really being successful self-regulation. Because again, if you have a bad day or you get triggered by something, and I'm hot and cold on that word, but if you get triggered by something, like you talked about deployment, if you don't understand why and able to slow that down and take, bad habits or bad feelings, or, again, counterproductive feelings, and turn those into a more productive outcome, you're going to end up having those bad days, and you're going to fall back on bad habits. You're going to fall back on bad experiences. And it's not if, but when. And we're not talking about people that are just bad at this. We're talking about even people that are really good at resilience have their bad days and get triggered by something. You have to be willing to really look at what's really driving my emotions and my physical reactions. What's my thoughts? What's driving my thoughts? You really do need to slow down the process. And that's where this tool is so highly effective. I just love this.
Yeah, and again, it takes time and practice. And one thing that I love that you said is it's not pretending, right? And so that's in my kind of final thoughts chapter of if you want this to be effective, you have to practice this honestly, and you have to do the exercises and make it part of your daily practice. Because if you're pretending to kind of change those thoughts, it's not going to be effective. It needs to be honest, real practice and reflection about, those moments that you're struggling with, as you said.
Yeah, and people really, and that's where real connection and real community can help break down those barriers. Because I think there are some people that, whether they realize it or not, they choose to stay comfortable in something that's actually an uncomfortable situation because it's what they know, or it's what they've always done. And they'll say, if you want something new, you got to do something different. Some people don't know. What does that mean? Again, so I've got resources, and I've got community, and I've got volunteer, and I know I need to change something, but I don't know how. When you start having real conversation and real connection with people, that's where we can start breaking down those barriers. And that's why I love things like, the book that you produced, and the idea of, it's not just a book club, right? I think community is good to get together and break down those barriers. But then again, we get to the now what part. And this book provides exactly that. It provides the tools, it provides the explanation, it provides resources, it shows real stories of resilience and overcoming and growing and thriving, to show that other people have been there and it's possible for everybody else to do it. Here's the tools, here's the resources, and oh, by the way, go have a conversation with 8 other spouses and start building those relationships.
Absolutely. And that's just, you summarize it perfectly. I mean, that just, I am so hopeful. When I started this journey to do this, I told myself, if it helps 5 spouses, it's worth every late night staying up and writing. And I've had a couple from the beta group already come back and just say, I can't tell you how much it helped me when my husband was TDY for a long time. And I had one of the editors on the book I actually picked was a non-military spouse on purpose. And I wanted to see if it was relatable to her as well. And she said she was separated from her fiance for employment reasons while she was editing the book. And she's like, it helped me rationalize through being separated from my fiance. She's like, I was actually doing the exercises and practicing while I was editing your book. And so to me, I am so hopeful that it helps those spouses that are really struggling to get out of their houses, that are isolating, that don't have the hope that things will get better. And so I just can't wait to see some growth with spouses and really help them thrive and see what they're capable of.
We talk a lot about resilience and mental health awareness and help for the military members. And we're seeing a strong push for military spouse awareness and, the key spouse groups and the resources and the community. There's another area and another population in the military family that gets left out a lot, and those are the military children. Can you talk about your experience working with youth and how this might have carried over to helping them through their struggles?
Absolutely. So, as a school psychologist, I was blessed to be able to work the last 2 years while at Kadena as with the Department of Defense as a school psychologist. So, with all the DODEA school systems. So, primarily, 100% of the children are either military dependents or military connected children, and just seeing what they endure as military children is heartbreaking sometimes, because I think as spouses, what is amazing is that we are adults and we have a voice, but we forget when we think about children is that they don't always have that voice, and their struggles are just as real as ours are, and yet they have even less control than military spouses do. And so I was able to work with them as part of this system, and really working through a lot of rational behavioral therapy with military children to help them gain, again, the goal being gaining back some of their control in situations where they get, as I saw with my children, it was either we were moving every summer or their best friends were moving. And for a 7-year-old, that's heart-wrenching when you're losing your best friend. And as adults, we can rationalize through that better. It's difficult for me to say goodbye to my best friend, but I can rationalize through, I'll probably see her again, or I know at some point. But to have a 7-year-old, and I remember my daughter, for one particular friend, I've never heard her cry so hard, and it was helping her through that, that you will have hope, you will make new friends. That's so predominant, and especially in the school system that I worked in, is seeing that cyclical nature that military children go through. They are resilient. Our military children are amazing, but I think they endure a different type of stress and level of stress that sometimes we're not even aware of how significant that is. So really my next book that I'm already starting to work on is for the military child. And so it's going to be, I'm not sure what direction yet, but it's going to either be helping parent, not parenting skills, obviously, but helping the military child cope with military lifestyle. So they are seeing a significant upswing with mental health concerns with military children. And so I think a lot of it we need to go back to is helping give them tools to help themselves. So
that's outstanding, and I'm very excited to hear that you're working on that book. And after reading yours this weekend, I can only imagine how fantastic that would be as a tool for parents and for military children. So really excited to. Do you have a? You said you're just working on. Do you have a schedule or a proposed release date?
If my husband were standing behind me, I'd say at the end of next year. We'll see. I've started writing on it, and I have a tendency to be hyper focused, as he said. So I anticipate, within this year for sure. The stories are coming down now. The part of it is I have all the research done already on the military child and the statistics associated with it, but it's gathering some of those personal stories, and it gets a little more difficult, right, when you're dealing with children and protecting their anonymity if they want it, and getting those permissions as opposed to a spouse saying you can have my story and signing off on it. So it's a little touchier when you have when you're working with children and gathering those stories. So that's a part that I'm kind of trying to work through right now. But the research is all done. Now I'm putting those anecdotal stories, and then I'll take that rational behavioral approach for the military child and making that in exercises and reflection questions that are applicable at their developmental level.
Excellent. Great. Well, we look forward to hearing more about that. We are approaching the end of the time. I told you a certain amount of time, and I want to be respectful of what we agreed on. So let's wrap this up. First of all, tell everybody what you've got going online, and where do you live online, and where can people follow you to learn more?
So right now I have my website. So Dr. Kendra Lowe, thriveonllc.com is where I'm posting my most recent material, and as well as articles and updated book information. I have a book launch page on Facebook, and then an Instagram page, which is Dr. Kendra Thrive On. So those are primarily where I'm at right now. I am not super savvy at social media, so that's definitely been a challenging area for me to put myself out there a little bit more. But those are primarily where you can find me right now. And obviously, there's a link to send me a personal email for follow-up information through the website. So. And upcoming, so the actual launch date is January 13th, in which I'm really trying to push the book on that day. As you saw, the intro of the book is the Department of Defense posted for the first time ever the number of military spouse suicides in 2017, and that was 123. So I'm really trying to increase awareness about that. And January 13th, we'll launch the book, and my goal is to get 1,230 books out there, and when that does, then the company Thrive On, which I'm in charge of, the company will donate to mental health for spouses to charitable causes. So
outstanding. Well, we will get the information out as best as we can. Again, the book is Wake Up, Kick Ass, and Repeat: A Guide to Self-Perseverance Within the Military Spouse Life Cycle by Dr. Kendra Lowe. That is on Amazon. You have the your website also posted. I will post links in the show notes. Dr. Kendra Lowe, that's Lowe. You're on LinkedIn. Can check out some of the information there. Very, very excited to have you on the show, and I really appreciate the time that you spent today. Looking forward to seeing what this what we can do. I mean, affecting change takes change makers. And I think that the conversation that we've had today and the book that I read this weekend that is out soon or will be out is exactly the kind of thing that we need. We need more conversation beyond you need to be resilient, because we all know that. The point now is now what? And I think that you're the type of person, and this is the type of tool that people need in their hands so they can answer that question and actually do something about it.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure, and I appreciate your time and having me today, and I'm just really excited about where this can go.
Great. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Neil Wattier podcast. Please leave a rating and a review to help spread our resilient stories and help others develop their mental skills. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. For more information about my coaching and development services, visit neilwattier.com. Let me help you develop your skills to grow and thrive through stress and adversity and propel your mental performance from good to great.